Alrighty. Hello, everyone. My name is Angie Railing. I am a prevention coordinator here at the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We are super excited for this webinar series with Pam Malin from Disability Rights Wisconsin. We're doing a four-part webinar series on supporting survivors with intellectual disabilities. I will turn it right over to Pam so we have time for content. Thank you so much, Pam. It is always great working with you. And thank you so much for doing this with us.
Well, thank you so much for asking. And it's so nice to partner with WCASA and the other partners that we have. We currently work on a grant through OVW Underserved Grant that WCASA, Angie specifically, sits on our partners team and just kind of helps give insight. And we always value the collaboration between them and Domestic Abuse, People First Wisconsin, and NAMI of Fox Valley. So it's a labor of love that we're doing through that grant, and that ends with the curriculum that will be at the end of this series. For those of you who have signed up, you will get a copy of that in the mail, which I'm super excited to talk more about that on the next or the last session. But today, we just thought that we'd start with the basics. Um, I know that this is pretty basic information, but sometimes because I've lived and worked in the world of disability forever, I feel like that I assume that people know a lot of this information. And I really want to make sure that we're all starting with a basic knowledge of disability, and then we can build on that each week as we go. I also want to make sure that this is a place that you can ask the questions you want to ask. This is not about judging questions. This is about learning together and just being better advocates as a whole throughout the state for victims and survivors in general, but specifically for this, victims and survivors with disabilities. So I appreciate all of you signing up and giving me some of your valuable time. Let me just tell you a little bit about myself and then we'll move on. So again, as Angie had said, my name is Pam Malin. I work at Disability Rights Wisconsin in the Victim Advocacy Program, which is specifically a program that works with victims and survivors with disabilities who have been victims at the intersection of sexual abuse, domestic violence, caregiver abuse, stalking, sexual harassment, and then we also have several other abuse opportunities to work with victims of abuse through some of the other grants that we have. And right now we're fortunate enough to have grant work that we can do the whole age span, whereas sometimes we're limited by who we can offer services to. And at the end of this, I will again talk about our services and how you can connect to us. So I have been doing this work for approximately 30 years. It is something I'm passionate about. I usually say I would do it even if I didn't get paid, but I see that my supervisor is on here, so I didn't say that out loud. Um, but I really do have great passion for making sure that survivors with disabilities get access to the same things and are afforded the same opportunities and justice as individuals without disabilities. So we will move on from here. So this is just a reminder of the upcoming trainings that are set up once a month. Again, WCASA has generously asked for us to participate in this and do a four-part series, which we're really excited to share with those of you who already know about us or who haven't heard about us or haven't partnered with us. And then at the very end, as you see to the right, My Relationships, My Choices is a curriculum through our OVW grant that we have completed and now have an online portal that you can go through and do a train the trainer. And we'll talk about that more at the last session. All right, so let's get started. First, I want to just make everybody a little more acquainted with Disability Rights Wisconsin as a whole. I also want to make sure everybody knows we have an interpreter today. So if that's necessary and needed, it should be pinned on your screen. If I'm too fast, Brady, please let me know. Okay, thank you.
All good, thank you.
Great. Disability Rights Wisconsin, or we go by DRW as our acronym. We live in the world of acronyms, right? So you'll often hear me say DRW. It is the Protection and Advocacy Agency for Wisconsin since 1977, and PNA is the acronym that we use for Protection and Advocacy Agency. The federal DD Act says that every state and territory in the United States has a protection and advocacy agency, which Disability Rights Wisconsin is the one in Wisconsin. Every state and territory has a UCED, or a University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. In Wisconsin, that's the Wasteman Center, which is connected to UW-Madison. And every state has a DD Council, or Developmental Disabilities Council, and that is Wisconsin Board for People with Developmental Disabilities in Wisconsin. And the three entities must work together to collaborate around issues related to individuals with disabilities. Our charge is to have a place for people with disabilities to come to when they feel like their rights are being violated or not heard. And then we have several programs within that that they can connect with. The Protection and Advocacy Agency itself has the ability to investigate and monitor some systems, so to make sure that they are not violating the rights of individuals with disabilities. So we oftentimes people think that we're part of Wisconsin state employees, and we're not, because we have to be a standalone so that we can make sure there's accountability for agencies or programs within our state that work with people with disabilities. So we also have several programs besides the PNA. We have disability benefit specialists. They are attorneys that work with the Aging and Disability Resource Centers. Every county has one in Wisconsin. And those attorneys work with them to ensure that people get access to the information they need to sign up for disability benefits, or possibly take it to a higher level of mediation to fight for their disability benefits. We have prescription drug benefits and Medicare Part D. Again, that goes along with some of the disability benefits, and people that know the ins and outs of all of that. We have Family Care and Iris Ombudsman Program, or we call that for short FCOP. And most people with disabilities in Wisconsin go through a functional screen at the Aging and Disability Resource Center. And once they qualify for services, then they are afforded the opportunity to pick a family care or IRIS program to work with. And those are MCOs, or managed care organizations, care managers, case managers that help guide and connect people to services as their needs are and as their wants are, depending on the level of funding that they get. We have SSI, Managed Care External Advocacy Project. And then we have the Victim Advocacy Program, which is the program that I work with. And Disability Rights Wisconsin is considered to be a law firm. So many of the individuals that work here are very skilled and knowledgeable attorneys around disability issues, and in our case, victim and disability issues. And then the other portion of our staff are advocates, and they're very dedicated advocates to making sure that people get understanding and access to the information that they might need to understand what their rights are. All right, so that's a brief overview. There will be a link to our agency if anybody wants to go online and read a little bit more. Be patient with us. We're rebuilding our website, just like everybody says, I think, these days. So our mission is to advance the dignity, equality, and self-determination of people with disabilities. And the one thing I want to make sure that you hear throughout this training is that the individual with the disability is our utmost priority. It is the person that we are working with. It is the person that we are advocating for. And their wants and needs are put above the wants and needs of the supports in their life, the parents in their life, sometimes even the guardians in their life, depending on what those are. But we want to make sure that that individual feels heard and supported within whatever they need and want, and within the scope of what we can do. All right, so let's start with a couple definitions. So, what is disability? A disability is an impairment that may be cognitive, developmental, intellectual, mental, physical, sensory, or some combination of these. It substantially affects a person's life activities and may be present from birth or occur during a person's lifetime. Disability is an umbrella term covering impairments, activity limitations, and participation restrictions. So this is a legal definition of disability. What we want to say is that when we're working with individuals with disabilities, when victims of crime with disabilities come through your agency, they may not come with the label, but they may come with a disability. So one of the things I want to emphasize as we're going through this series is that we need to meet people where they are, and that we also need to make all of our services as accessible as possible, rather than ask for what their disability is and then respond to that. If we can be accessible to everybody from the get-go, then nobody really has trying to think. Nobody really has like to overcome too much. They might have some specific needs that they can request, but that you have an accessible agency and people hopefully are more likely to access your services. I did see that there were some questions. I'm going to just pause for 1 second to see if there's
Yes,
anything. Thank you.
Jamie does have a question asking if there's a wait list for your services. They have a huge wait list in Kansas.
Yeah, so hi, Jamie. Jamie is with us from Kansas. She is one of the OVW partners that we have on our underserved grant. And thank you for the question. The MCO, the Family Care Iris Ombudsman program that we created, was supposed to eliminate a wait list. I think that they exist in some form or fashion, but we don't call them wait lists anymore. So maybe then they aren't considered wait lists. For the most part, people do get services or access to some services if they qualify. But there are definitely restrictions about how much housing access we have. Caregivers are always a real limited commodity, I think, in every state, including Kansas, I'm sure, Jamie. So there are definitely limitations, but there are also some rights around that. So Disability Rights Wisconsin and our FCOP agency can sometimes help navigate some of that if that's necessary. So, all right, thanks for the question, Jamie. So the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act, is defined as disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. So in this series, we're going to kind of concentrate on people with intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities. Developmental disabilities is an umbrella term. I had used that on the last slide. And that is a term that covers disabilities that happen prior to your 21st birthday. So if you, as an example I often use is if you are 7 and riding a bike and get a brain injury, you would be under the developmental disability umbrella because it was prior to your 21st birthday. If you were 35 and fell off your bike and got a brain injury, you would be considered to have a brain injury. And the reason that it falls off at the 21-year birthday is that it's because school is something that can happen until your 21st birthday in Wisconsin and in the country. And it is meant to say that there's learning up until you leave school. So that's where the definition comes from. And then intellectual disability is just one disability under that, where they have some struggle processing, and there might be a variety of other disabilities that come with that, or it's just on its own. And then there's a level of how much care or um, processing information or other um, things that they need to assist them in learning. All right. So the thing that I think all of us as advocates really should keep in mind is that the ADA has a guarantee. And the guarantee is that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else to enjoy employment opportunities, purchase goods and services, and participate in state and local government programs. And from an advocate perspective, what that means to me is that they have the same right to have law enforcement take them seriously. They have the same right to participate in the criminal justice system if that's what they choose. They have the same right to be notified about hearings, to have the opportunity to confer about a case, to understand that case. And sometimes we have a system, and we're all part of a system that tends to check a box that we did something, as opposed to making sure that somebody actually understands what we're doing. So, as advocates, one of the challenges that I would give to you is that make sure that the individual you're working with not only gets the paperwork or the information given to them, but that they understand it. Because the ADA guarantees that people have the same opportunities, and with that comes understanding their rights and understanding the services that they have the right to. For an example, there was a county that we were working in, and um, the agency said that it's just our protocol to send the letter. And the individual I was working with didn't read. And so, as an advocate, I got a release and I said, could you please send me the letter at the same time so that I can then know what you're sending and then help explain it to them? And they said, no, I can't do that. I can only give this information to the individual. And the individual didn't live in the same town as me, didn't know how to take a picture of the letter to send it to me. So we went round and round several times, and finally we actually asked for an ADA accommodation to ensure that they had the ability to understand what was being sent to them and not just have it checked off a list saying, we've done our job and that's all we're going to do. And you don't have to be communicated with in a way that is understandable. So understanding that sometimes the ADA is a tool that we can use to ensure that our victims, survivors are getting the information that they need and are getting access to the same afforded access that people without disabilities have. So oftentimes people walk into our office or especially into the crisis offices or the crisis center or the hospital, and they don't come with a label that says, here's my disability, here's how you can help me, this is what I need for accessibility or understanding. So we have to be better at knowing that some of the things that we do have to be accommodating from the get-go. So one of the things we'll talk about is plain language, but that's taking these worlds that we work in. We as advocates work in, criminal justice often. We work in systems with the county. We work in prosecutors or attorney systems, and they all have this lingo. We have lingo, right? That we use these acronyms, we use these big words, and people with disabilities, people in general, honestly, don't always understand the words of those um, programs or the professionals that use those words. So understanding that part of our job as an advocate is to break down that information and make it understandable to everybody that you're serving, and especially if it's somebody with a disability. Sorry, that just did that by itself. So, some of the disabilities that we can identify when somebody comes in, that often we say, oh, that individual has a disability and has a need, can be visible by the eyes. So, physical disability, somebody uses a wheelchair, somebody has braces or a cane. Those are things that we can kind of in our mind right away say, oh, they might need more help or more assistance. Somebody with cerebral palsy, oftentimes their gait is a little different, their speech might be a little different. So then we know that we might have to um, ask them what they need more of, or maybe how we can understand them better. Someone with Down syndrome, somebody with Tourette syndrome, somebody with dwarfism, things that are either visible or pretty quickly acknowledged when somebody comes in for services. Then there are other disabilities that we can't necessarily put our finger on, but we can say maybe something's going on, or maybe they need some extra assistance, or maybe we just need to change the way that we're advocating for them or communicating with them. So they could be somebody with an intellectual disability. I've had many times where somebody walks in and after having a conversation, you say, okay, they're not quite understanding what it is that I'm explaining to them, or I might need to explain this differently so that they understand it better. Or I might ask them to tell me back what it is that they're hearing me say so that we can decide whether or not they're understanding what I'm saying and I'm understanding what they're saying. Somebody with a mental health disability that clearly we won't see necessarily, or know that we have to accommodate them in some way. Somebody with chronic illness, some pain or things like that that we maybe don't know is going on. Sensory disabilities, oftentimes we think of autism, but there's other sensory disabilities that come with that. Communication disabilities, and then brain injury or memory impairments. Those are just a few. So understanding that not all disabilities are visible, and people with them are not invisible either. So if we change the way that we're talking and communicating, then we can make sure that we're accessible to everybody. Jamie, I see a question again. Um, if they wear eyeglasses, this is an accommodation. They are visible but overlooked because most individuals have experience with eyeglasses. Thank you. That's, yeah. So I think what Jamie's getting at is that if we see somebody with braces, we know they had crooked teeth. If we see somebody with glasses, we know that they likely have a visual impairment of some sort. Although, if you see somebody with contacts, I don't necessarily always see somebody who has contacts, so it's not always very apparent. So that's a good kind of way of explaining it, that we don't always see the contacts, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a vision need that needs to be addressed. So, really just meeting the person where they're at, I think, is the best way to talk about this. And I think sometimes we're afraid to ask the question of like, what do you need, or what can I do to be most helpful? But I think we have to get comfortable doing that with all victims that we work with. Is there something more that I can do that would be helpful? Sometimes it's too cold in the room. Sometimes it's too loud in the room. Sometimes they need to be somewhere where there's less stimulation. That doesn't mean they have a disability. It just might mean that that's the accommodation they need with their trauma. It might mean that they just are shyer and want to be in a quieter place off to the side. I mean, there's all sorts of reasons it could be. So if we get used to asking, how can I make this the best environment for you, or help you understand the information best, or what do you need from me? If we do that with everybody, then I think we don't miss those invisible disabilities. And do we really need the label, or do we just need to know what that individual needs? So the next couple slides, I just put some different definitions around disabilities, and I don't really want to read them for everybody, but I think it's important for us to kind of know that every disability is on a spectrum, and some people have multiple disabilities, some people have disabilities that impact their life more or less, and that we can't assume that one person with autism is the same as all people with autism, that we really do need to meet the people where they're at. I worked with a supervisor years ago who was legally blind. You would not know that other than she couldn't drive a car because of her vision impairment. And then when she needed to see something more clearly, she put on a pair of glasses that had a monocular. So it was like the one little, where she could zoom in on the screen or on the paper to kind of see it better. So technically she was legally blind, but if you ask people who don't know a lot about disability, they might assume that she can't see at all. So there's these variety of disabilities and a variety of levels. So understanding that not everybody presents in the same way and that we have to be flexible with our definitions and our understandings, and we just really need to ask what would be most helpful. I don't know how many people are familiar with deaf, with big D and little d deaf. Um, I'm going to explain it in my words. This is not the legal definition. This is the plain language definition that I often use, but I think it's easier to understand it because some people are like, I don't know what that means. So I'm going to explain it the best I can. So big D deaf, as I understand it, so that means you spell deaf with a capital D, is somebody who is born deaf into the deaf culture and into a deaf world. So possibly their family is deaf, their schooling is full of people who are also deaf, their education comes from teachers who are deaf, and their culture, just like if you're Hispanic, your culture is a Hispanic culture or the country that you come from. This is a language difference and it's not viewed as a disability. So it's about a cultural language difference. Little d deaf is often people who are born into a hearing world, a hearing family, a hearing culture, that they then are learning how to use their voice, may have cochlear implants depending on their family and their medical desires. And they kind of assimilate or fit into the hearing community. So that's the best way that I can explain it. And it might not be perfect, but I think that helps us understand a little bit more about big D and little d deaf. Then there's intellectual disability. You will hear sometimes people say intellectual disability, sometimes people say cognitive disability. Back about 20 years ago, you would hear people say the R word. And they had Rosa's Law enacted when President Obama was there. And they passed Rosa's Law because it was a brother who went to the Capitol and to Congress and said, my sister's doesn't like when you use those terms, and that's a derogatory term. And they changed the law to make sure that that was now intellectual disability instead. And then our governor in Wisconsin changed it to people first language as well. So people first language, speaking of that, is making sure that we're talking about a person before we talk about their disability. So if you wore glasses, I wouldn't say the glasses lady, I'd say the lady who has glasses on. So much like that, you wouldn't say the disabled victim, you would say the victim with a disability, because that's the person first language. It's the person we're talking about. Sometimes some individuals with disabilities have a preference and they want to have their identity first, so their disability first, but that is somebody who then will name that, or you can ask them what their preference is. The most important thing out of all of this is respect, and then just making sure that you ask if you're not sure so that you're not offending. and the individual can give you what's best for them. Because again, everybody is different. I'm going to pause just for a second to see if there's any other questions or comments. I don't think so. I think we're good. I did want to share because I saw in the comment section, I have several of my coworkers. We recently hired 5 new staff, and we have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 stellar staff that exist still from prior to that, that some of them are on the training. So all of us are willing to answer questions or step in. Kaylee Cowan is on here, and she's one of our staff attorneys. And then Monica was on here, but she had to leave, and she is our new managing attorney. So some ways to put this into practice and make sure people first language is being used is to think about person with a disability or disabled person, what is their preference? And then not using the offensive language that oftentimes we still hear, believe it or not. I'm shocked sometimes that I still get people to say some of the terminology that is put on here, or that people say around people with disabilities, including people in very high places use some very off-color actions or words around people with disabilities, and it's very insulting. And I think we oftentimes hear people speak up about other oppressed populations, but we don't always get people outraged about people with disabilities being the butt of a joke or being called words that aren't okay. So if we as advocates and we as helpers in our community, if we can be sure that we're modeling the right words to say, I will hear sometimes people say, oh, they're wheelchair bound or they're confined to a wheelchair. A wheelchair isn't something they're confined to. It's a tool that they use to get places. It is not who they are. It is just one more thing that they use. I use a car, or I use, other equipment, my wheelie chair at work sometimes, but it's not that I'm confined. It's that that's a tool that I use. So understanding that the words you use do have impact. I often hear also people use the word normal, and what I will correct people and say is that you can do person with or without disability. You can also say typical versus somebody with a disability. But at some point, everybody has the possibility of getting a disability because it doesn't pick gender, it doesn't pick race, it doesn't pick age. It is one, it's kind of accessible to all of us, which we all need to understand that at some point we either ourselves or our family can be impacted by this. So being a good model and understanding how to be respectful is really important. So we often talk about the word ableism, and we don't always know what that looks like or what that sounds like. So I put this cartoon in here because it's a cartoon and it's supposed to have some yuck yuck humor to it. But the reality is that I see this happening an awful lot. Many times I go to trainings with individuals who I'm friends with who have disabilities, and they'll ask me what the person wants. They'll ask me if they need something. And of course, I'm a friend of theirs, so I'm going to say, I don't know, do you need something? And kind of model that they should ask the individual. But it is something that happens quite a bit, and that is a form of ableism. It's the assumption that somebody can't answer for themselves or can't speak up for what they need. So understanding that some of the things that we do without thinking can still be ableism. So ableism stems from the belief that disabled people need fixing, that we are less than. It is treating disabled people, and I would put people with disabilities, but this is the way it's written in this here, um, less favorably than non-disabled people. It can appear in many forms: microaggressions, hurtful comments, words or actions, um, lack of accessibility, not considering access needs of disabled people, therefore kind of causing a bigger disability or lack of access. Privilege, failing to see beyond our own lived experience. Many times I see people assuming that just because somebody has a physical disability, that they also have an intellectual disability. So understanding that we can't assume anything about a disability. And really, it's just very important for us to ask or to get to know that individual and not make assumptions. I did see a comment from Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie. Um, and Stephanie is a friend of mine living with a disability, and she models self-advocacy and speaking up for herself and others very well. And she has experienced ableism an awful lot. So I don't want to speak for you, Stephanie, but I know that that's just part of the reality that you live in and that we need to do better with.
Yeah,
So
I
go ahead, Stephanie. You want to say something?
I was just saying hi. I agree with you. It needs to be worked on. But yeah, it happens all the time, for sure.
Yeah, probably daily for you, I'm sure.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So, people often use words, again, back to that, the appropriate words to use. The R word, spaz, dumb. Again, people in big places with lots of authority sometimes model that behavior in a way that teaches people to be using really bad words, and hurtful words, more importantly. Attitudes believing that, people with disabilities need to be fixed or that here's one that I get really frustrated with, is that people go, "Oh, poor you," like it kind of almost like, oh, if only you were typical, then you wouldn't have to go through all of this. And people with disabilities have great lives and access to things to do things, or maybe they don't, but it's more about the system than about them. So understanding that sympathy is not what they need, access is what they need. Anybody else have examples of ableism that you've seen or that you've experienced around somebody or heard even on TV? I think we hear it sometimes unintentionally, but it's there.
Um, I've noticed when there's like the neurodivergence end of things, autism, ADHD, stuff like that, if they're quote unquote high functioning, then they're not really disabled. So there's a lot of assumptions made like, oh, well, you're not really disabled. You can handle that just fine. My son is autistic, so like I hear it all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Even just the higher functioning component somehow uses that level of, well, they're not as bad as the lower functioning. And that label is something that we don't like to use either, because that's kind of building in an automatic assumption, right? That somebody is less than somebody else. And so, yes, I agree that there's all these assumptions that are made around autism, or if somebody has seen Love on the Spectrum or any of those kind of shows, then we assume that everybody is or isn't like a show that we see with somebody with a disability in it, and that's just not the way it is. So,
I think
um,
a huge one, Pam, in our
yeah.
field is assuming that people who are disabled can't be victims of sexual assault.
Yeah, or can't consent to having sex. I think it's both ends of that, right, Angie? And I think
Absolutely.
that's one of the sessions we're going to do on purpose, because oftentimes, I mean, probably weekly, I'll get law enforcement or prosecutors calling and saying, well, they couldn't consent to, and I'm like, wait, they didn't consent, but couldn't is not the right terminology here because they have the right to consent. They just didn't consent. So let's talk about the behavior of the perpetrator and not the behavior of the individual. And I do a lot of talking with law enforcement and prosecutors about charging cases where the perpetrator is held accountable and the victim isn't held responsible. And it's amazing how often we want to think that if we just say, well, they couldn't give consent, therefore it's second degree sexual assault. And then they go, wait, they gave consent to their husband or their boyfriend. So now I have to throw this case out. And so if we can have that conversation before they make that mistake, that will help us get cases charged and more accountability and better justice for victims, right? So there's a lot of assumptions that are made around levels of disability and ableism. Thank you. All right, so I brought this up a little earlier when I was introducing myself, but I'm a strong believer in universal design and access. And I think it's even bigger. I mean, oftentimes when we hear about that, we'll talk about or we'll hear about new building plans that say things like, oh, you have to have doors this wide and you have to have no lips on the entry of walkways and you have to have elevators. And agreed. All of those things are very important in new buildings because it will ensure that all people have physical access. But universal design, in my opinion, and I've been talking this for 30 years, is much bigger than just a building. It is about our attitude. It is about whether or not we're a welcoming agency, that when somebody with a disability walks in, we don't go, oh, I don't know how to help that person, or go get that person because they can do it, but I can't do that. Or you want us to do what? Or I don't know anything about that. Um, or um, that their brochures or their paperwork is all written. I mean, even internally for us, sometimes we recently had one of our attorneys have a bunch of handouts about the court process for us to give to victims. And I'm like, that's great. But A, it's using some words that is not in plain language. And B, it's all written word. And there are many people with and without disabilities, honestly, that can't read. So what are we going to do instead of that or in addition to that so that everybody has access? So access, I think we have to open our minds to say access is about everything we do and everything we offer. And how do we sit down and have a conversation about that before somebody needs that? Or if we've dropped the ball, how do we now sit down and say, how do we make sure next time we have that information in place? And some of that might be calling us and having a conversation at DRW Victim Advocacy Program, or some of it might be just, putting your brains together and as a team and saying, well, my mom is older and she needs access to this, and this is what we do. And people are like, oh, I never thought of that. That's a really easy fix. Like, what does that look like? So really being thoughtful and preemptively thinking about it instead of reactively thinking about it, I think is really important. So if we design everything we do to be accessible to everybody who we serve, then we don't have to change it for that one person. And honestly, when you change it for that one person, sometimes it makes it feel awkward or bad that they have to ask for extra. So if we have that universal design, that asking for extra isn't necessary because we're saying, what do you as an individual need? But we ask that of every person, and we become accessible throughout just learning for our agency. So how many people use plain language or understand what plain language means? you can, I think we can click our little hands up thing. I don't know if we can do that or not on this one. Can anybody give me an example of using plain language? All right, let me give you one and then we'll see what else comes in. So I was at a meeting years ago. An agency called me in. This is when I worked at a local sexual assault agency. And they called me in and they said, would you talk to these two individuals who participate in our disability programming because they're getting too handsy and too touchy, and we want you to tell them that they can't. First of all, that's not my job. Second of all, that's not fair to single these people out. So I had a conversation with them first about that. But I said I would talk to them about what their policies were around boundaries with staff, staff to staff, client to staff, all of that. So we were having this conversation and they had an advisory committee, including a few people with disabilities because of the idea of nothing about us without us, which I think is really important. That if you're making decisions about people with disabilities or people of color or people from different cultures, that they should be at the table helping make those decisions because it is their perspective that is most important at that table. So we had individuals with disabilities at the table, and I kept talking about how we need to be really concrete and talk very black and white when we're talking about boundaries. And I kept saying that over and over again. And I had one of the individuals with the disability raise his hand, and he said to me, Pam, you're saying bad stuff. And I said, okay, help me understand. What am I saying bad? I want to learn. And he said, you keep talking about Black people and white people, and that's not okay. I wasn't talking about Black or white people, but his perspective of that was exactly what that plain language, concrete thinking example I was talking about. I had to say it more clearly using words that made sense to everybody and not just in this kind of, phrase that we use kind of flippantly to describe things that have to be explained clearly without gray area. And again, I'm using a color, so that didn't even compute. So making sure that we're using language that everybody can understand, not just the lawyers in the room, not just law enforcement in the room, but everybody, including the victim themselves, can understand. And I think this is universal even without, for victims without disabilities. I just think we have a system that's quite confusing sometimes, that uses some words that don't make sense. Confer and, some of those things, like I didn't go to law school. I need to know what that word means in plain language. It means we can talk about it. Oh, well, now that makes a whole lot more sense to me, right? So just kind of breaking down that information. So you using simple language whenever possible, being concise, speak in black and white, which even in this description, it says that. Avoid lengthy sentences, break them down maybe a little smaller into chunks, especially when asking questions of the victim that you're working with. Use concrete language, not idioms. Give choices. Avoid the yes and no. I just met with a client yesterday or a victim yesterday who I would ask her, are you feeling scared? And she kept saying scared. And then I'd say, do you want to talk to somebody? And she'd say, talk to somebody. So I'm now learning very quickly that every answer is going to be exactly as I asked it. So now how do I change it into plainer language where I can give her the voice to say what she wants instead of saying what she thinks I want to hear or just repeating back to me? So I saw a comment that B put in here. I use plain with B said I use plain language when speaking with victims who speak Hmong. Recall, instead of recall, I say remember. Yeah, I think that again, that's that universal component of it, right? Is that it's really not about somebody with a disability. It's about somebody understanding the language that you're using, whether it's not their first language, whether it's you know, a profession that they're not aware of the language that's used, or they're in trauma. I mean, there's many things that people in trauma don't catch or hear because it doesn't ring a bell to them in that moment. So how do we break it down to help them? And then how do we repeat it later to help them understand as well?
Hey Pam,
Yeah.
it's Steph again.
Yep.
I just wanted to pipe up and say, at People First Wisconsin, we do have a plain language team that works on different like documents and different educational pieces to bring it into more plain language. And I have learned so much. I know a lot, but I've learned so much from our plain language folks. And it came out of that um, understanding that we get a lot of medical stuff, we get a lot of legal stuff, we get a lot of um, like assessments done, and people kept coming and going, I don't understand um, what this says. Can somebody help me understand what this says? So we started a team um, that really just looks at those kinds of things and then puts them in plain language. We worked with a bunch of different agencies, a bunch of schools for curriculum development and stuff like that. It's really neat. And one area that they always remind me of um, is plain language extends beyond just documentation. So when you're preparing a presentation, um, like they said, just pay attention to how many words, how much information you're putting on a slide. Um, Make sure it's designed with some white space and things like so that for folks with processing issues or folks that need it just broken down into smaller pieces, it stays that way. So for presentations, newsletters, anything like that, I'm always like, okay, this is the working design we have. What do y'all think? Like, give me notes because I may have missed something. And I think that's a great thing to do.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I forgot to mention that, but I have actually gone to several individuals from People First Wisconsin and just shown them things that I'm doing and just to make sure I'm thinking through it from the lens that I should. And I often miss things. I think we should do that in general with everything that we put out, even if it's just internally in our office to say, how would we make this more plain language, or what are the words that I used in here that I just automatically use just because of the work that I do every day. I say that word, but how do I maybe break that down to make it more understandable? So thank you, Stephanie. That's a good reminder. And Angie put the website for People First Wisconsin in the chat. And there's a great team over there. It's super knowledgeable. Having them even speak to your team or co-present or any of that kind of thing with those requests. They're very busy, but they like to accommodate a lot of things too. So if there's something helpful, definitely, or that you need, reach out to them and see if they can point you in the right direction or help you themselves. So thank you. So this slide is just to remind everybody that everything that I said today is really just a basic 101 information. But if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. That there is no one size fits all. There is no, everybody's going to do it this way. Everybody's going to need information like this. It really is. And I think we as advocates get this, but we sometimes forget it because it's somebody with a disability that we get a little nervous, not because we are afraid, but we don't want to get it wrong. And I think it's because we care so much. We don't want to get it wrong. And I think it's it's okay to say, I don't want to get this wrong. Help me do it the right way? Or can you let me know what's best for you? But all of the victims that we work with have needs that we have to just get comfortable asking them, what is it for them that they would need in that moment, and then go from there. So I'm almost done. So I'm going to quickly kind of leave you with the information about our program, because I'll go over this each time, each one of these trainings, just so I kind of tell you what we do. But the Victim Advocacy Program is at Disability Rights Wisconsin, and we have written several grants, and the grants allow us to work with individuals with an identified disability. We do not need the proof of their disability, which many programs in our state having to do with people with disabilities need proof of a disability. We don't need them to give us a doctor's note. We don't need to give them to give us a diagnosis. We definitely want to know, because of their disability, what are things that we can help them with, and we'll put that down, as a label that they tell us, but not because we need proof of it, but just because it'll be helpful in working with them, and because we're a disability organization. We work with people who've been sexually assaulted, experienced domestic abuse, dating violence, stalking, caregiver abuse, as well as other abuses at the intersection of disability and victimization, regardless if they want to report it to law enforcement. Some people don't want to report, and I think sometimes we as advocates see the lens to direct to criminal justice, and we really need to make sure that we're making sure that's what the victim wants and not just an assumption that we go ahead with. And then some of the services that we provide are personal advocacy, victim accompaniment, many of the things that all of you provide. One of the things that we can do that most of you don't have the ability to do is that we have attorneys. Keely, like I said, is on here, is one of our staff attorneys. She has helped with countless divorces when the victim has a disability and the perpetrator or the offender is the father of the children, or is, somehow using her disability against her, things of that nature, restraining orders. We have attorneys that can work with those. Again, it has to be at that intersection of disability and victimization. In some cases, when a victim is going through the criminal justice system, we all know that the prosecutor is not their attorney. Obviously, the defense attorney is not their attorney. So we can, if necessary, be their victim rights representation and have an attorney, a third attorney at the table, which just makes sure that their rights are being followed and listened to and recognized. The biggest thing, though, that we can do that all of you need to be aware of, and we'll go over this, again in the future, is that we provide co-advocacy, and that's the way we wrote the grant. So it is not double dipping in a grant. It usually is not handing off a case to us. It's us working together. And then we can handle the pieces that we're good at. You handle the pieces that you know locally and are good at. And then we provide a more comprehensive support for victims with disabilities. Once in a while, one of us will take the lead. Once in a while, one or the other agency will do the advocacy, but it really is on an individual by individual basis. And then just kind of how we work together. I'll go over that more next time. And then this is how you can call us and get connected to us. So we do have an 800 number that anybody can call. If it's an individual that you're working with, if they're able to call, they can call and an intake would be done. If they can't call on their own and you get their permission, you can help them reach out for assistance. If you want to talk directly to Victim Advocacy Program, you can ask for that. And then one of us can help with that as well. So I know that that was a lot in a little bit of time, but luckily we have 3 more times to talk again. And we'll get more specifically into some of the other information that's necessary. So if there's any questions, I will gladly take them. Otherwise, I thank you all for your time, and I will see you next month.
Yes, see you on June 4th, where Pam will be talking about the intersection of trauma and disability. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, everybody. And thanks for those that asked questions and stepped in and talked. Stephanie, thank you. So
Thank you, ladies.
thanks, Angie. Thanks, WCASA, for having us. And thanks, Brady, for interpreting.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you.